Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Barry Kull. Barry is the Senior Director of Category Management Americas for AstraZeneca. His experience has given him the opportunity to develop capabilities in a broad range of spend categories, as well as to have experience with the transformational power of technology. So, hi, Barry. Thank you so much for being with me here on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Now, I talked a little bit in my intro about your high-level experience, where you work, but we know there's so much more to anybody's background than what they're doing today. Can you talk a little bit about your professional journey to this point?
Yeah, sure. So I started out after getting my undergraduate degree from Penn State. I started out in sales, selling steel pipe right to the construction industry. And, that quickly, after about a year, I got into strategic procurement. Transition, like anybody else's journey, we're not quite sure, but it just happened. And from there, it was a small kind of little cost takeout firm. But then, that's where I really fell in love with procurement, I dare say, because it has always been, from day one, a huge curiosity for me, because just understanding how a business works, right? How, obviously things are bought, but why they're bought and sold, especially those, which is super, super complex and can get interesting. So that's kind of where the bug started for me. And from there, I really was able to focus on in healthcare and consulting. So I worked for Accenture Consulting for a number of years. I worked in industry, but all focused on pharma, biotech, and medical devices, and always in procurement. And it's been a great journey, since day one. But again, a little bit of consulting, a little bit of technology, a little bit of industry, kind of actually make it happen. So yeah, that's been my journey so far.
Well, I wished in this conversation I had one of those old-timey soundboards, so that when you said you'd spend some time in sales, I could have gotten in a good bum, 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 like the drama enters the scene. Yeah. We've got a sales background. And actually, that's where I'd like to start, because you and I are going to talk about how procurement can work through relationships to actually increase impact. But I have to think that having spent some time in sales earlier in your career actually played a role later on as you got into procurement and started formulating your own philosophy, finding your own way of filling those roles. What would you say was the connection between having experience on both sides of the table?
It's really around communication. With sales, you have to communicate your value proposition. Even before that, you need to communicate what you are selling, right, or what you're offering. And putting myself on the opposite side of that, on the procurement side, you need to really understand what it is you want to buy, right? And what's important to you or the customer or stakeholder. So I think that was the key, just really seeing the interconnectedness between a sales professional and a procurement professional, and just really getting curious about the fact that to do it well, you both have to communicate well. And that's the thing that really, really intrigued me from the beginning. Everybody has their struggles. Everybody has their strengths. In the beginning, communication was not one of mine, to be quite honest. And so I saw it as an opportunity to get better at communicating. So that's the thing that really kind of put the two pieces together for me.
And I'm sure both sides have things about them that people assume. We generalize, right? We think of salespeople as being sort of like, hey, yeah, whatever you want, right? We'll make it work. What's it going to take for me to get you into this car today? Kind of an optimistic approach. And procurement, I'll say, I think gets a bad rap for being,
we're just worried about the pennies. We're counting the money. It's only about savings. And it's taken us a long time to move beyond that, but we can't always assume that people who've worked with procurement teams in other companies or in the past are going to be up to date with procurement's current focus. So if we think about, even if it's a brand identity or a recognized kind of persona associated with procurement inside of a company, what should procurement be thinking about to deliberately craft and then project the right sort of identity to colleagues they're going to be working with?
It's a few things. That's a great question. There's a few layers to it in my mind. I think the first is to seek to understand. Then you'll be understood, right? It's an old saying, but it's very accurate, I think, especially in procurement, because we need to understand, first of all, who the stakeholder is, right? What are their motivations? Because if you're working with somebody who's the head of a sales force versus somebody who is working on a latest AI project, technology project, or somebody with head of a brand, they're going to have different objectives, different motivations. Even before that, they're all different people, right? So really understanding is how they work, and then really seeking to understand what it is they want to buy. And I use that term very simply and on purpose, because at the end of the day, procurement, we're buying stuff, right? Buying and negotiating. So really understanding what it is that person and their motivations needs to buy, I think is the first kind of brand identity we need to put out there. Because as you mentioned a little bit earlier, right, procurement, the old trope is worried about the pennies, right, the dollars, right, how much we spend, how much we're going to save. But I think the other important piece is really understanding, what it is that to buy, as I just said, but also why we're buying it. How does it fit into the greater value chain of the company that you're working for? And to really think much more broadly than just how much we're buying, how much we're spending, how much we're saving, and what cost savings category it falls into, right? That's a huge piece for me, because then that kind of takes the procurement professional out of that mindset, that kind of stereotype. You're a business person. First and foremost, we're there to conduct business. So I think that's the first identity, is just really understand who we're working with, what we want to buy. The second kind of major theme for me would be speed, right? Yeah. Moving at speed, no matter what it is highly important, and a big part of being a good professional these days, especially in a large, complex organization. Knowing, how to maneuver, right, your internal processes, but also thinking like that business person, whether it's a brand manager, salesperson, or technology. They need to move fast. We all need to move fast, and so keeping that speed, right, and keeping at pace, right, with the business and how fast they need to move. And I think third is really just flexibility. Yeah. Again, procurement, we're saddled with just being the money people. Really that, and then the other thing that, growing up in this industry, as we've been saddled with, is, the no people. No, you can't do it. No, you can't do that, right? That's not the way we do it. For me, that's a huge mindset shift, in that, we can do it. Whatever you need, let's figure out a way to make it happen. The bounds of compliance and certain processes and all those important things. But at the same time, figuring out how to make it happen is a huge, huge competitive advantage, I think, for any procurement professional these days, because of all the complexity that we deal with. And not only the internal processes, but also, the complexity of what it is we're buying. If you think about AI, huge one, right? Introduces so many unknowns that we just need to keep pace and figure it out.
Yeah. I actually appreciate where you started, which was, saying first we need to seek to understand, and then we can hope to be understood. And I think when you break it down to some of those things that you listed out, it is very possible that we could have someone in the company that thinks of procurement as the people who buy things slowly, right? And that would be a fair idea for them to have in their minds, depending on who they've worked with in the past. And so it's taking a little bit of time. And I love the fact that it has become part of the ongoing conversation, but understanding truly what the procurement user experience is. So it's not just our systems, but it's knowing which system to go to, or understanding how the process flows after I submit a request for something, making sure people are clear, making sure people know what's going to happen next and have some visibility into it. I have a feeling that that sort of experience investment is something that will ultimately pay dividends in terms of procurement's relationships internally.
100%. The relationships and are everything. If I can overstate it a little bit, because you're if you think about a sports analogy, if I could, you're only as good as your last play. Your last play, because your last play, you got to look forward, right? So for me, it's just having that good, solid relationships and pulling through when somebody needs something. I think is hugely important. And having that, what it boils down to me is having that trust, right, in that other person, building that trust for the other person and yourself, that when they come to you, say, hey, I got this problem, I need to speak to somebody in legal, came up with a contract. How can I bypass the whole legal process and get to the right person so that I get my answer quickly, because this is super critical. Having those relationships is super key, right? And I do pride myself and my team on the fact that we get those calls to say, hey, how do I solve this problem? I see the SOP, I see the link, but it's not working for me right now. To move at pace, right, to get this problem solved, and we figure it out, right? And that, again, getting it done for the stakeholder.
And yet in that process of getting it done, certainly going back to your earlier point about communication, the way you respond to that call or that email as it comes in, and that's a combination of words and tone, right? Regardless of your communication channel, that goes into that whole user experience as well. Have you found that there's either terminology that the business doesn't tend to be receptive to, or terminology that they really do tend to respond to, so that we don't get stuck in sort of the TLA procurement terminology vortex where we're talking but not necessarily communicating the message we want to get across?
Yeah, for sure. I think first and foremost, don't go into the initial conversation talking about savings, right?
That is a great guideline.
Savings will come if we're doing our job, I guess, correctly, right, or appropriately. The savings will always be there if we're asking the right questions up front. Again, starting with, what do you want to buy? What's important to you? Understanding, even simply, hey, what are your objectives for the year? Okay, so if we understand that, then we can start to connect the pieces to what it is they want to buy, good or service, right? But then, if you take that process step and just kind of peeling back the layers, the savings will come. So for me, the immediate turnoff is savings, right? From my experience and with stakeholders. The other kind of thing to avoid in my mind is talking about process. Let's talk about what needs to happen and talk about process in the background, right? Or maybe not at all directly. But if you talk about next steps, right? Who needs to connect to who? What conversations need to be had? It's a way to address that process question, but without talking about, here are the 7 steps of strategic sourcing. Blah, 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 blah.
File under didn't need to know.
Exactly. I mean, there's no stakeholder that I've ever worked with that was interested in the 7 steps of strategic sourcing. So we just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Unless they ask about, hey, how does this work? And there's been some stakeholders who have asked me that, and that's always fun, right? You talk kind of about your craft a little bit, but it's really, really about kind of how you make things happen for them at pace. And so, but more so on the positive side, the terminology or the thought process that works for me with stakeholders is always about, what does good look like, right? What does success look like for you? It could be, anything from the basics around getting the right agency of record got on board for brand that is easy to work with, has the best creative, and delivers right on the brand plan on time as expected. To if you're thinking about a really nuanced program that talks about helping with patient education, patient adherence, right, and pull through, then it's really understanding what good looks like, and how they're gonna basically pull through. That supplier, if you will, is gonna pull through right for your stakeholders. So it's really talking about business objectives, I guess. At the end of the day, is talking in there. I think is really important.
Now, one of the things that we see playing out differently in different procurement teams is the presence of category expertise. There are some teams that are pure process generalists, right? They will come in, they might have, I've sourced that in the past, but they don't necessarily have industry experience working in an industry or working with a specific category. And then there are other teams where this is the marketing person and this is the logistics person, or the logistics team and the marketing team. Do you tend to find that category expertise within procurement helps build that bridge and understanding and relationship? Or does it work better when the business feels confident that they're the ones that truly own the category expertise, and procurement is really just there from a process, governance, maybe even technology standpoint to facilitate the process?
Well, that's a great and interesting question. I think it comes down to the individuals that we're working with, because there are some people, right, some stakeholders who will look to procurement, the category manager, for process, right? How do we do this? Who are the preferred suppliers? How do we engage them? Basically, how do we get to an SOW and a project plan and, a team of suppliers, let's call it agency of record, kind of engage.
Yes.
There's other stakeholders who want to be the experts, right? Yeah. And sometimes they, whether it's a personality piece or it's the subject matter is so technical that they need to be the expert. The procurement professional needs to, the category manager, needs to be able to recognize that, kind of read the room, and figure out what tools in their toolbox need to be taken out for that particular situation. But for me, at the end of the day, the category manager absolutely needs to be an expert in the category. And I use that term kind of hesitantly, because to be an expert, you really got to be an expert. And all the years that I've been doing this, it's really hard for me to put on one hand or point to certain people who are real experts, because there's so much out there to learn, and every situation is different. There's people who are really on top of their game, absolutely know the supply market, absolutely what the internal stakeholders are needing. But to say you're an expert really means you know everything, in my mind, and maybe I'm being too strict. But this goes back to one of my former managers and mentors, Tom Papa. He really drilled that into me. He's like, "Tell me you're an expert," right? He challenged it, and that really, it's hard to say I'm an expert. I would never rock up to somebody and say I'm the expert on XYZ category, because I just don't know everything. Well, a lot. I know how to find my way around for sure. But I don't know everything, and every circumstance is different. So, I think it's just really important to be able to understand, have a deep tool bag, if you will, and know when to pull those tools out, right, for each situation.
And that requires a lot of sophistication. I think you use the phrase reading the room. And so procurement has to have category knowledge. We have to have process knowledge. We have to be good at using the technology. We have to be analytical. We need to be good at interacting with the business. Yeah. That's a lot of layers of different kinds of skills that all have to come together really in concert for procurement to achieve the whole array of business outcomes we're trying to drive.
Yeah.
Can this be fatiguing for procurement? Is there an exhaustion factor associated with trying to be all these things at the same time?
For sure. I think, and it's never been more difficult or I think more of an opportunity to be a category manager than I've seen in my career. It's difficult because of everything you mentioned. We have to be good at all those things, relationships, data for sure. Analytics is just, that's something that has been coming up, if you will, in the profession, I think, for the past probably 5 years, right? Being really good at understanding data and analytics and how to apply it. Another piece is artificial intelligence, but I want to bring that subject up to maybe just and the different hype cycles that come along, whatever category you're in. And then, of course, the relationships is a key piece. So it can be exhausting. I think that's, for me, that's myself, for the team that I manage, the teams that I've managed in the past and in the future. It's really about understanding those people and understanding how to prioritize, right? What's important in terms of day-to-day deliverables. But then, I mean, I could go on and on about this, right? You got to think about what's the operating model that you're in, right? Am I more of a category manager or am I more a business partner? Thinking about the industry that you're in, the category that you're managing, because again, depending on your stakeholder set, they could be more technical, they could be more relationship based. If you get into more like the market access and business development type of stakeholders, and neither. It's more about understanding the supply market and what they're capable of doing, and what we need, capabilities we need to bring in and relationships we need to bring in to help those areas. So it's it's exhausting. But like I said, I think that's the opportunity, and that's the exciting thing about being a category manager these days, is that every category is different. Every person is different, whether you're talking to a supplier or a stakeholder. And if you've got a good set of experiences and knowledge sets and capabilities, it can be super exciting because you get to apply different parts and use the analogy tools every day. So every day is different. So that's, to me, that should be the super exciting part about being a category manager.
Absolutely. Now, Barry, as we start to wind down our time here, I want to bring you into a tradition we have at the Sourcing Hero podcast. I'm going to give you 2 questions. You can choose either one to answer, and I haven't heard a wrong answer yet. So your choices are, what does the idea of a sourcing hero look like to you? Or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Heroism in a business context.
Okay.
For me, that means being vulnerable with kind of where you're at in your profession, in your life, right? And seeing situations that may require you to be uncomfortable, whether it is you need to kind of speak up about something you're seeing that you don't quite agree with, whether it's not, you need to step up and do something within the confines of your role and responsibility. I think really making yourself vulnerable is a true hero for me, because it's not easy. I try to do it every day or every time I'm faced with a situation like that. And it's not easy. I like to think that I do kind of show up when the situation requires. But from a pure psychological experience, right, emotional experience, it is not easy because we're all human, right? And at the end of the day, corporations are business units and P&L statements and processes and SOP, but it's all people behind it, right? So I truly believe that's what makes a company market to people. And we're faced with situations every day that are not comfortable, for sure. So it's really being comfortable with yourself and bringing yourself to the table.
And I think a lot of people sort of share that experience with you. I can still remember it. It seems funny to me now. First time I had to do something on video, I thought, well, I'm done in that field. And yet you find a way, right? Think, okay, how much discomfort can I handle? And now I'm routinely on camera more hours a day than I'd like to think about. But having a support network, right? Knowing that other people are being understanding, knowing that everybody is uncomfortable in some capacity with some of what they have to do as part of their job. I think facing up to that and getting past it and doing it collectively, I definitely agree with you. That is, in fact, evidence of heroism in a business context.
Yeah, and if I could, I mean, I think that's something that that I encounter every day.
Yep.
You know, finding situations that you're not so comfortable with. Sometimes I seek them out. Sometimes they seek me out. But you know, it's just kind of being uncomfortable in that ambiguity and that kind of situation or kind of everyday life, and especially in a corporate world where you don't know what's going to come your way that day, and you just got to be ready to understand it and kind of deliver through it. So it's that part. That's another exciting part for me, is that just finding that new opportunity every day to stretch yourself and to honestly think differently. It's super important.
Now, Barry, for people that have joined us to listen into today's conversation and they'd like to connect with you or they'd like to reach out and connect, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
It's really LinkedIn. You know, I have my LinkedIn profile out there, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. And happy to connect with anybody, any conversations, if I can help anybody in any way. Very open to that. And just continue kind of conversations like this. I think keep it interesting, right? And keep it fruitful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.